This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearing. We have 3 cases on the agenda, and all 5 board members are present. We have a quorum. Mr. Peralta is not here today, so Deidre will be presenting for him. So the first case is RPC 34006020 at 2900 Crystal Drive. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property, sir.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board, good morning. So this property is actually 2 office buildings. It's 2800 and 2900 Crystal Drive. Combined, they total 350,000 square feet. These buildings were built in 1990, and as of the date of value, were over 51% vacant. To start, I want to discuss the county's office assessments in general. So we're going to hear from the county that they decrease office assessments by an average of 11% from 2024. Now, this argument, to be valid, assumes that the 2024 assessments were accurate, were at the fair market value. We can check this. We have the data from the 2024 calendar year to look at it and see, is that accurate? Were the 2024 assessments at fair market value? Well, if you'd be so kind as to direct your attention to page 4 of the board book we included with the appeal, you'll see that of the market sales that occurred in 2024, the corresponding assessment was, on average, nearly twice that sale price. What this means is that judging the 2025 assessment by the percent change from that 2024 assessment is not an accurate gauge of if the 2025 assessment is at fair market value, as we know from market data that the 2024 assessments were on average nearly double the sale price. As a baseline, knowing that sale data from calendar year 2024, we know that 2025 assessments would have needed to decrease by 50% to capture the market. Instead, as the county has stated in the guidelines, they only imputed an average decrease in the office market of the county of 11%. So obviously that misses the mark. Also on page 4 of the board book, you can see those 3 2024 sales with the subsequent 2025 assessments. So this is how we can also gauge, how did the 2025 assessments stack up against those market sales? Did they get those sale prices accurately? This data, looking at the 2025 assessments on those properties that traded in 2024, shows that the 2025 assessments are still 42% greater than those 2024 sales. What this means is that 2025 assessments, even after decreasing on average 11%, as the county tells us from 2024, are still on average 42% greater than where those market sales tell us they should be. So based on hard data, we know that the 2025 assessments are not capturing fair market value. I'll also mention that there were 2 non-market transactions that occurred in 2024. Both of these were not marketed. They were between private parties, off-market. They included owner-occupied buildings, and those properties are not generally accepted as indicative of the market at large. So this sales data begs the question of how is it that the county has assessed office properties for 2025 on average 42% greater than what market sales tell us they should be? The answer, of course, is multifaceted. It includes failing to consistently account for concessions. But the primary issue is the county's cap rates are not based on market data. They're not derived from the market. The county has testified to the board on multiple occasions that their cap rate methodology relied first on the Corpex cap rate study. Looking at this study, we see that the county's cap rates are actually lower than the low end of the Corpex study. Now, I do want to share my screen. This is what the county has presented to the board, and you can see in the highlighted portion, the highlighting is mine. You can see that the low end of the county's cap rate at 8.25% is actually below what the Corpex report concluded as the low end at 8.48. That is 23 basis points lower than the Corpex conclusion. If you go to the high end, it's even more off base. The county's high end is 11%. Corpex concluded the high end is 12.16%. That's 112 basis point difference when comparing apples to apples. So the county's presented this on multiple occasions, said the primary source was a Corpex study. Yet they also presented in black and white that their cap rates actually dip below that by anywhere between 23 and 112 basis points from their own expert study. that has been listed as the primary source, the first source to look for cap rates. Now, turning to the actual Corpax report, digging into that a little further, I assume the county's provided this report to the board. You can see on page 70 of that Corpax report that he states he used 6 sales for his Arlington County analysis. These 6 sales are listed as sales number 1 and 3 through 7 on page 65 of the Corpax report. Looking at these, we can determine where the low end and the high end of his range are derived from. The low end relates to the sale of the Potomac Tower at 1001 19th Street in Rosslyn. Corpax report that Corpax concludes that this sale was at a cap rate of 8.56% loaded. So this illustrates again that the county's cap rates are below the lowest of the 6 sales the county's expert determined were indicative of the market for the county. Now that 8.56, that's due to the inclusion of the Rosslyn bid in this rate there. So what's the importance of this one sale to the county's cap rates? After all, Corpax utilized 6 sales, so the county surely wouldn't just cherry pick that low sale and build the rest of their cap rates off of that, making effective age adjustments, right? Well, here's how the county's cap rates compare to that low sale. So this is the low sale, 8.578% loaded. Here's how each of the other tiers of effective age differ from that. You can see a 10 basis point adjustment, 25 basis points, 20, 40, 65. They're all very cleanly flowing from this keystone cap rate that is related to the Potomac Tower sale. So this data does tend to illustrate that the county relied on just the one sale at the low end of the Corpax report to develop all of the office cap rates. So we know from the data that the county's cap rates are heavily reliant on the sale of the Potomac Tower. So let's look at the sale of the Potomac Tower. This property sold in August 2024. The seller was Brookfield, the buyer was Venture Global. I spoke with both the buyer and the seller to verify this sale. You can find the details of the sale beginning on page 10 of the board book. Essentially, this sale was a private transaction that was not marketed, was not bid, and is not reflective of the overall market, not reflective of properties such as the subject where this fact pattern does not apply. The buyer, Venture Global, occupied 40% of the building at the time of sale. The buyer had indicated to the owner that they wished to purchase the building throughout the years. They told them, we want to expand in the building. They couldn't because the building was fully occupied. So that was a frustration point for the buyer. They also indicated to the owner, the former owner, that they wanted to make changes to the security at the building. They wanted to make infrastructure changes at the building, which they could not as a tenant. So Brookfield knew that Venture Global wanted to control the asset. Add to this, Venture Global had recently raised a large fund. They were a startup about to go public January 2025, recently raised a large fund. Knowing this, Brookfield approached Venture Global and offered to sell the property at a stated price, to which Venture Global said yes. So those are the facts of this sale. This is the sale that the county has based the rest of the cap rates on. Our cap rate uses the Corpax report excluding this sale. That's how you get the 168 basis point increase. It's based on the change in the Corpax report conclusion from 2024 to 2025, excluding this non-market sale. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Deidre, Ms. Kelly for the county, please.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. Good morning, Jordan. Again, I am presenting for Mr. Peralta. Again, this is the property located at 2800 and 2900 Crystal Drive. There are 2 office buildings. The 2800 Crystal Drive has 10 stories. 2900 Crystal Drive has 7 stories, with a combined NLA of 352,860 square feet. As Jordan mentioned, both properties were constructed in 1990 and also have the same effective age. I apologize for that. The buildings are located approximately between 2 metro stations, Crystal City, which is approximately 0.8 miles away, and Reagan National Airport, which is a little over a mile. In this particular case, Mr. Peralta looked at the rents that were used in the rent roll, the 2024 rent roll that was provided for 2800 Crystal Drive. The average rent per square foot was $37.71. For 2900 Crystal Drive, the average rent per square foot was $36.02. and the combined average for both was $36.57. If you look at the county's several pages, but if you start on page 3, which is the summary sheet, as well as page 5 and 6, you can see the rent per square foot for each property, especially on page 6. It does break that down with the average of both and the total NLA. And on the summary sheet, which is page 3, you can also see the in the original assessment, the per square foot that was used, and that was $34 per square foot. The based on the 2024 rent roll, the approximate vacant square footage was 45.6%. That was 160,943 square feet. And according to CoStar, which we didn't use in the January 1 assessment, I'm just referring to April 30th, it was 150,455 square feet. Now, we did also conduct a test for this particular property, and a reconstruction was conducted as well in column E1. The reason for the reconstruction, again, is because this was actuals that were provided. It does not include the vacant square footage, which Rob then imputed that number there. So if you look at column E1, that number is a better indication of the total value versus column E, which is the actual value that does not include the vacant square footage for that year. In this particular test, we did, I apologize, I can't even see my own notes here. But in the test, there was an increase to the, there was a change to the leased square footage. There was also a change to the vacant square footage. And if you, there was no change to the vacant amount, the vacant per square foot rate of $33 that was used there. And I'm just trying to see any differences there. The biggest differences for this was just that he adjusted the vacant square footage versus the leased square feet. And then there was the 28% vacancy that was used, which is typical for a property of this sort of vacancy, which does have over 40%. And then there was an increase from the original assessment, which provided a $7 per square foot OpEx value, and we increased that to $8 in the test. And in the test, the value does still come, is still higher than what was projected for the original assessment, but is under what was projected as what the property will look like stabilized using reporting for the income and reporting for the vacant square footage in E1. There are also notes below that column that does account for the office lease square footage. And I'm just going to read through some of the comments that Rob put on the summary sheet. I can get it to show up on my screen a little bit better. And I don't seem to be able to do that. So I'm just going to speak from my own notes. So one of the areas of contention was the lease, the tenant for Strategic Insight. This tenant was on record as the date of value. And even if we remove that tenant from the lease, the average rent still remains higher than the $34 that was used in the original assessment. The county's operating expense figure used at $8.24, which is based on historical data, was adjusted for the market and was adjusted based on the reportings that was there, reportings of the history of the property. While the appellant does argue the expenses will rise significantly in the case, we feel that the amount used or the value that was used is indicative of what the property does continually to report. If you look across on page 3, you'll see the history of the property at 2.3 million. You'll see the property expenses are reported for each year. And seems to be a steady increase. I don't want to say the amounts, but you can see that the increase goes across for each year, and they're pretty consistent. We do believe that the $8 that was used in the test and the $7 in the original assessment are reflective of what the property continues to see as far as their operating expenses. As far as the cap rate goes, I just want to note a couple of things. I know that Mr. Harmon does mention several times, or has mentioned several times, that the county specifically or primarily uses the CORPAC study as its only source of for developing our cap rates. It is one source, and we've always indicated that it was one source. Yes, we realize that there are a lack of sales. We also rely on PwC, RARC, a number of other publications when we develop our cap rates. And for this year in particular, there was an additional category that was added for properties that were built within the last 10 years. And when they shifted the cap rates, there were properties that fell in other ranges, which actually gave them a higher increase than other properties based on where they sat within that range previously. And I'm just going to note, if you refer to page, I apologize. I just want to go through page 8, which is our cap rate reporting. We do specifically note CORPAC as the first publication, the first resource, but that's simply that. This is our first resource. And then we also rely heavily on some other resources there that are listed, the RARC, PwC, and the CBRE. We look at our sales data first. We also look at the cap rates from the previous year to see where they fell in line and what adjustments we need to make based on our market data. I recommend that the board confirm this property's value, and I'm open for questions. I'm probably do better with questions than I did with the presentation, but I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Hoffman.
Yes, so in the reconstructed expense or income and expenses from the county, we've got like a bunch of asterisks, and one of them is vehicle expense, which is like a 6-figure line item number. Jordan, do you know if is that a Metro shuttle? Because it seems like it might be a Metro shuttle. I can give you the number if you want, but it's on page 3, the reconstructed expenses, and then that same number is on the 2024 financial statements that were provided by the appellant.
Let me see. So the operating expenses, you have the row 15, maintenance and repairs. Is that?
If I'm going to
vehicle expense.
It's the $156,000 expense that's listed below the column.
I can see. I'm not aware off the top of my head if that is directly related to a shuttle.
okay,
Let me see.
because the county's taken it out, right, Deidre? Like you pulled it out of the reconstructed.
I believe
Actually, he didn't take it out. He just noted that these were some of the higher expenses. He just noted those. It wasn't excluded.
If that's the case, then maybe you can walk me through operating year 24. There's a 4.29 million figure on NOI, and then the reconstructed is a lot higher. It's like $2 million higher. So how do we get from A to B?
Is that for me or for?
Yeah, Deidre.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your question? I apologize. I thought that was for Jordan.
Yeah, so if I go into the appellant's financial documentation, the NOI they show is like under $4 million, right?
Okay.
And then I go to the county's documentation on the summary page, and they show that the operating year 2024, the NOI was 4.29 million. And then if I go one column over, it says that there's a reconstructed NOI of 6.3 million. So I'm just like looking at it, if I was a buyer, right? What was the NOI last year? Like, how do we get there's a $2 million difference of opinion, which has a huge difference in the value of the building.
Understood.
And just explain like how we got to 6.3 from 4.2.
Okay, so in column E, which is what the And again, this is Mr. Peralta's work. I'm just speaking from what I know and how we develop the summary sheets and what we do and how we make and how we also conduct our reconstructions. But this would either come from an income and expense questionnaire. And so normally we provide that data as that data is presented to the department. And then in column E, we would then look for any items that should be excluded or any items that have been excluded, and then we would include those items. And in this case, the vacant square footage was excluded because they provided actuals. So if you go line for line, the second line does provide where it says DREA in column E1, that does add that number back in because they're providing the number after vacancy. The pro forma number, it typically comes in with the case. I can't really speak to why there are some differences there, but it does show that there's some reporting for that vacancy number. It also shows that their rent number is slightly different from or their price per square for the lease space shows a slightly different number than what is on the rent rolls. But as far as E and E1, that's the county's way of making it apples to apples. We're actually providing what they have presented to us, but then we are also looking at that data to make sure there's not anything included, make sure that any taxes have been included or excluded. We want to make sure that E1 represents the way that it should be reflected as it should be reflected for valuation purposes.
Yeah, sorry I'm beating on this, but it's like a big difference. So if I could just run, Jordan, just let me run you through your numbers. On it's page 59 of our package, the annual statement, the 12 months, January to December 2024. So, you've certified that these are all correct. So I'm going to go on that assumption. Now, if I go to the third page of that, and I hope you don't mind if I quote figures. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you've got NOI at 3.3,353,000. Okay. So if I took, and it's actual, right? That's not based on some imputed vacancy level or anything like that, right?
That's what the owners reported. Now, I think to answer your question, we agree with the county on the 2024 actual NOI at 4.29 million. I believe that 3.3 figure includes potentially expenses that are typically excluded. So let me see what adjustment we made on that to get there.
So if I put taxes back in there, that's 725,051. 051. That becomes 4.07, and then there was an asset management fee line.
Correct. Yep. Asset management fees.
Right.
Add that back in.
212 and 78. So you're at 4,290, and that was kind of where the county was at, right?
Correct. Yep.
All right. Okay.
We agree.
I mean, that seems like the NOI. Now, the only other thing that jumped out to me was Rob flagged the vehicle expense, which was high, but you're a mile from Metro, so I feel like this office probably provides a shuttle.
They do, yes.
And that's probably a driver plus a van. It's over 100,000 a year. And then the other number that jumped out that was a little crazy was the property management fees, which are like 22,000 a month, which is probably like 5 to 10 times the industry normal. So there's something loaded in there. Maybe it's salary is covered under that fee. So I'll leave that alone. So Deidre, would you agree that the NOI from last year, the actual, is that number in column E?
I would agree that that's what they reported as actuals, yes.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Greg, if I may, on the property management, it's 3.7% of rental income.
Okay, so it's a percent base. It's not like a monthly fee. Got it.
That's what it came out as when I divided the amount reported as property management into the amount reported as rental income for 2024, it's 3.71%.
All right.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Mendez?
For the county, I heard you touch on the cap rate change there in column F. So just to confirm, 9.4 is the correct cap rate for this property. Is that right?
9.4 is the correct cap rate, and it was only included in the test. Not a correction, but it was included in the test, and that should have been the one used. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Ms. Kelly, if you want to take a minute to wrap up then.
Absolutely, thank you. I just want to just note that some of the particulars of the case. I know that there was some discussion regarding the actuals versus while we reconstruct, we are valuing, this is mass appraisal. We don't, we look at the property for for gross potential. And so therefore we reconstruct the property and develop, and include the vacancy and exclude other items as necessary. In this case, the NOI with the reconstructed amount is higher than the original assessment. The test is also higher than the original assessment, even including the higher cap rate. And we would recommend that the board confirm this value is fair and equitable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So the county's test overstates the occupied office space at the property by 18,000 square feet. This is because the county includes a tenant who submitted early termination letter in 2024. Of course, that's known as of the date of value that tenant is vacating. That's why the county's test is so high. They include them as occupying instead of vacant. The test also overstates the potential rent for new tenants based on new leases signed at the property last year. Those leases averaged only $27 per square foot, which makes sense for this property, which is in a tertiary market. You have the RB corridor, then they go to Crystal City, then they go south of Crystal City to this submarket. Those new leases, again, at $27 a foot. The assessment and the test are at $33 a square foot. Now, for the cap rates, the DREA cited sources. We provided a summary of those on page 20 of the board book. There you can see that the DREA is below all of those sources. If you look at the low end, they're 115 basis points below the low end of PwC, Corpax, RERCs, CoStar, CBRE, and they're up to 134 basis points below the high end of those. So the other sources do not support their cap rates either. Thank you.
Okay, all right, now it's just among the board. This is complicated. Where is everybody? Mr. Hoffman.
I could try to just simplify it, right? Like if we just took that NOI that everybody agreed was last year's performance at 4.29 million and capped it out at the county's cap rate, it's 45,644,800, which is $129 a square foot, which is probably $30 to $35 a square foot above market value if it had to sell, but it's defensible from the county's methodology.
Okay, tell me again, how'd you do that?
Okay, so operating year 24, right? That's dollars in minus expenses. NOI 4.29 million. All right, and then I did 4,290, 615, and use the 9.4 cap rate. Nobody cares about discount for lease up because there's no leasing. There's no TI that actually makes any sense from any perspective of spending that money to get a tenant in the building at $30 a foot, which is what you're going to rent it for. So you just have to look at what's there and cap it and say that's the value. So 4.29 million at a 9.4 cap is 45,644,800. It's probably a 12 to a 15 cap in the reality, but if we want to stick with the county's cap rate, it'd be $129 a square foot.
Right. The only thing is you're not taking into account any of the vacant square footage.
Yeah, you just write that off. It doesn't get filled.
Right. Right, but
That's how any buyer,
LOI.
any lender's looking
Yeah.
at this building right now.
Yeah, I did something a little different. I took the original NOI and capped it out at the correct cap rate at 9.4 and kept the same deductions below the line, and I came out at 49,775,300. Mr. Mendez?
I did something similar to you, Mary, initially, but then I was looking at the expenses and they look pretty flat from a
Right.
dollar per square foot over the last few years. So I just used the expenses in column F in the test column, and I put those in column D and capped it out like you did, and I got 49,090,600.
Okay, Mr. Penaranda?
Pretty much in line with you and Mr. Mendez, except I don't agree with increasing the expenses because I think the numbers originally from that the county used at the $33, $34 per square foot, I think compensates for the difference in the expenses. So I did the same as you, Mary. I came up with the same number. And I don't agree with doing the way Mr. Hoffman is indicating because for purposes of equalization, we have never done just using the actual numbers.
Right.
Because the county, I mean, a lot of owners, they don't really put the vacant space there. And I think it should be added and to be able to, make the assessment proper and using it in an equalized way for everybody else. It's not our role, I think, to look at it as a buyer because we are not really assessing each individual property based on what they're producing on actual numbers, So I'm okay with making the change on the cap rate on the original assessment.
All right, Mr. Yates?
Yeah, I did it two ways. Mary, exactly what you did, and I agree. And I tried to work with column E and restructure it. I couldn't get anything to come out right. It's complex on it. I think the simplest and more direct route is exactly what you suggested. I don't think the expenses should change either.
Right.
That's where I
Mr.
was in
Mendez,
column
can
E.
you live with that? Okay. Mr. Hoffman, you probably can't, but you don't have. enough votes.
It should be reduced, so
Right.
I'd rather.
That's what I don't want it to
Yeah.
revert back just over confusion. So, all right, then I'm going to move to reduce the assessment to 49,775,300. And that is based on using the original assessment and capping it out at the corrected cap rate of 9.4 and keeping the below the line deductions the same. So do I have a second for that?
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion and a second by Mr. Penaranda. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so it's 4-1 without Mr. Hoffman. The assessment is reduced to 49,775,287. Thank you. Okay, the next case on the agenda is all the same players today. RPC 14051-358 at 901 North Glebe. So Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about that property.
Yes, thank you. So 901 North Glebe, this is a 324,000 square foot office building. It's there in Ballston at Glebe in Fairfax. Built 2005. As of the date of value, this property was 40% vacant. Now, this property did see vacancy increase from January 1, 24 to January 1, 25. Vacancy increased from 20% to 40%. Now, this 40% figure includes a tenant who exercised an early termination agreement on December 17th of last year. This tenant, as of execution and submittal of that early termination right, was known to be giving back 30,000 square feet of lease space. Any potential buyer would consider that. That's where the 40% vacant figure comes from. Now, that agreement is included on page 49 of the appeal. I also want to note an error on our appeal submission. The appeal column includes a tenant occupying 24,500 square feet. In fact, this tenant vacated at the end of 2024. We did confirm this on the inspection of the property this year on May 20th. Correcting for this tenant actually having vacated, as we confirmed, on the inspection brings the occupied office space on the appeal column down to 183,000 square feet and the vacant office space to 123,000 square feet. If we carry this adjustment through the rest of that appeal column, it results in a claim value of $62 million, which is $192 per square foot. Now, we did provide this on a revised pro forma to the county on an email right after the inspection on May 20th. I don't think that made it into the county submission, unfortunately, so we'll just have to mention it during oral arguments. Now, you'll notice the occupied figure I mentioned of 183,000 square feet. This is 11,000 square feet lower than what the county's used in their test column. This difference is attributable to the county, including a lease that was signed in April of 2025, post date of value. We know that the board has consistently ruled that post date of value leases signed, such as this one, are not considered occupied as of January 1. So please keep that in mind when looking at the county's test column. It does include that April 1 sign date of that new lease. That April 1, 2025 lease, by the way, does not begin until June of 2026 and does include nearly $1 million in free rent concessions. Now, the current assessment for this property is at $285 per square foot. This compares with the county's testimony, prior testimony to the board, that similar buildings in the county will sell typically for around $100. The $285 assessed value on this property represents a 10% decrease from last year. That's, of course, less than the 11% that the county has told us the office market decreased overall. So essentially, the assessment for this year is saying this property is in the better half of properties on average than the rest of the county. We know that's not true. Vacancy at the property increased 20% year over year. NOI decreased 31% year over year and will decrease further with that known vacancy coming up in 2025. So why is this assessment nearly 3 times what the county states comparable properties sell at? Well, it's because the county overstates the occupied office space by 11,000 square feet by including that April 2025 signed lease. The assessment fails to account for concessions, and the assessment imputes a cap rate based on non-market data. Now, taking these in order, the county overstates that occupied office space by that April 2025 signed lease, including that as occupied. Removing this from the analysis results in the occupied office space at 183,000 square feet. Now, again, I did inspect this property May 20th with Mr. Peralta. Mr. Peralta confirmed with the owner that that lease was signed April of 2025. I asked him, are you going to include that? He said, I'm going to use it for market trends. So I'm surprised to see he actually brought in that actual lease, because that's not what he communicated to me on the inspection. I did provide, after the inspection, a written summary of our inspection and what was discussed. This, wasn't included by the county in their case today, so unfortunately we can't refer to that, but that was submitted to the county along with the revised pro forma. That lease, again, included over 900,000, close to $1 million in concessions. Next, the county makes 2 errors on the office rental rate in the test column. First, it looks like they used 2026 rental rates for a few tenants. That includes the national maintenance agreements, the Institute for Justice, and for that April 2025 lease. Looks like on their rent roll, they imputed 2026 rental rates and not the current 2025 rental rates. This was discussed in that email that I had sent memorializing our inspection on May 20th. Again, that's not included, but it was provided to the county and pointed out to the county as well. The next error on the rental rate, the county imputes concessions on the initial assessment of 4.6%. And then on the test reduces concessions to 2.4%. Now, the guidelines, of course, say concessions will be considered on a case-by-case basis. So looking at this case, we have 2 different ways of looking at it. What's the history of the property say? And what do the future leases, the new leases say? Well, over the past 3 years, concessions have averaged 13% each year at this property. This is row 10 on the county's test page. You take the average of those into the income, it's 13% is what concessions have averaged. This compares again with the initial assessment at 4.6% and the test at 2.4%. Now, additionally, there were renewals in 2024, a new lease in 2024, this new lease in 2025. If we look at those and say, what is the anticipation for concessions going forward? So we've looked backwards, 13% is what it's averaged over 3 years. What's it going to incur going forward based on these new leases? Those new leases have $4.4 million in outstanding concessions yet to be incurred. So if we impute those, either way, we're getting to a rental rate that's less than $40 per square foot. Essentially, the county has just failed to actually look and consider concessions at this property, either looking backwards at historical or looking forward at concessions known to be incurred. Now, this is required by generally accepted appraisal practice. We've included the Appraisal Institute's guidance on this, their statements on this on page 67 of the board book. We'll also see in the next case that the county is imputing actual concessions where that property only has 2% concessions. So it seems like, if concessions are low historically, they'll use actuals, but if they're high historically and going forward, they'll just come up with another figure. So we just ask for some consistency there. Either use historical, use future, just apply it consistent. Now for the cap rate, this property has the exact same cap rate as the sale of the Potomac Tower, essentially stating that these two properties are perfect comps for each other. This assumption mistakes the fact, doesn't make any adjustments between the properties. It ignores that the Potomac Tower was 100% leased at the sale versus the subject only 60% leased. No adjustment for the risk is made there. A neighboring property, they've included this April 25 lease. They ignored the neighboring property that sold in April of 25 at a 21.5% cap rate based on the county's NOI. That property sold at $100 a foot. Just down the street at 4075 Wilson, that traded in September of last year for $147 a foot. That was also not included in the county's review. Our value is at $192 a foot, well in excess of all these sale comps. The assessment's at $285 a foot, more than triple these sale comps. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kelly, for the county, please.
Thank you. So the subject property is a 6-story Class B office building, is located in the Crystal City submarket. It is there were a couple of items that were mentioned. I just want to make sure that I bring those up. Actually, the subject property is a 331 square foot office building. It's located at Green Road and Fairfax Drive. It was built in 2005. It did lose two tenants, which Rob did note on the summary sheet, as well as within the valuation. If you refer to the summary sheet, I'm just going to walk through that, but I'm going to read through some notes for a moment. 128,746 square feet was noted as being vacant as of the date of value. And this was accounted for, the excess vacancy was accounted for with the new leases after capitalization. An analysis was conducted for this property showing that the average rent was $46.59 per square foot for the office and $37.41 per square foot for the retail. The new leases, however, averaged $46.53, which is right in line with where the county is. Nandria used $42.50 for vacant space and $45 for existing leases in the test. So we are using a number that is slightly lower than what's being reported. If you refer to the summary sheet as well as the test sheet, which is right behind it, right below it, the sheet behind it, on the bottom column is where we do our deductions for rent laws, TIs, and leasing commissions. If you note that 128,746 square feet was used there, so that does include the lease that Mr. Harmon is mentioning. It's just taken after cap. Now this property, looking at the operating history, we also conducted a reconstruction in column E1. Same situation as before. We're simply just trying to compare apples to apples, the way we treat every other property, by including all of the factors that would be the office rent, the vacant office retail, and the vacant retail if it was not included. So that was done here. We did use the agent's numbers in some of the categories that were omitted or were not included in the original actual figures. Looking at the original assessment in column D compared to columns B, C, and column E1, which is the reconstruction, it does show that the original assessment was in line, if not low, compared to these other columns. And column F is does give is a better reflection of where we are today. But we are looking at when we value these properties, we're all looking at the information that was available to us as of November, December. So looking at the current rent roll, we did make adjustments to the rent. We increased the office rent by $1 to $45 per square foot. We also increased the vacant office in the test. But even in this particular situation, as far as the test NOI is still lower than the reconstructed value. Yes, I know we don't like to show a reconstructed value, but again, we are trying to value this property as we value every other property in the county, and it is the process for mass appraisal. If you look at the trends for operating expenses across the board, this is what we use in the original assessment is actually higher than anything that's been reported. And we are accounting for the additional vacant square footage below the line. I would recommend that the board confirm this value as fair and equitable, and I welcome any questions.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? No? Okay, Ms. Kelly, do you have any final comments?
Just that this property was valued consistently as we do every other properties. We did conduct a reconstruction, and the operating history speaks for itself when it comes to the NOI. The original assessment is actually lower, much lower than the reconstructed value, which includes all of the factors as well as the test value. And I would recommend that that the board confirm the value is fair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property, the vacancy went from 20% to 40% year over year. NOI decreased 31% year over year. Yet the assessment decreased less than average offices in the county year over year. That doesn't track. This property is clearly in worse shape than it was last year. Vacancy increased 20%. NOI decreased 31%. The current assessment comes out to $285 a foot. This is well above what sales comps have sold for in recent history. 4601 Fairfax across the street sold for $100 per square foot. It had the same occupancy at sale as the subject. They were both 60% occupied. So that begs the question, how is this property nearly 3 times better than that property? It's not. The assessment's just too high. You can also look at 4350 Fairfax sold next door for $100 a foot. Again, we see $100 a foot, $100 a foot. 4075 Wilson sold for $147 a foot with similar occupancy at time of sale. Our claim value is $192 a foot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. It's just among the board. Where are folks on this? Mr. Hoffman?
I mean, I'd offer to look at the appellant's pro forma numbers for NOI, just for some of the reasons Jordan mentioned. Counting leases that haven't been signed and whatnot. So when I looked at his NOI, but I used the county's cap rate, I came up with a number of $79,989,400.
Okay, other folks? Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, I was just looking and comparing all the columns. In column D, I think their GPI and EGI are not too far off from the appellants. I know the appellant uses slightly different per square foot figures for the office rents and retail rents. I didn't go through and do the math exactly, but it seems like what the county has is about the average or so. I know they did mention double counting the lease, but I think that was only on the test column. So if I'm not mistaken, that wasn't done on the original assessment. So I was okay with the EGI, and the expenses, as mentioned, were higher than the test or what was reported. So with all those things considered, I didn't see anywhere I could move to reduce it a little bit.
And Greg, just to confirm, you took the actuals again, correct? Not the appellant's.
I used column G, the appellant's pro forma, and then the county's cap rate, and then the discount for lease up. Jordan's got a 10.225 cap rate. That's the only difference from column
Right.
G.
I guess just then in checking your math, 7.1 at 8,545 is 83 million.
Yeah, and then there's 3,841,086 below the line to get to 79,989.
I see. Okay. Other folks? Mr. Penaranda?
No, I'm pretty much with Mr. Mendes. I don't see where to make a change. I think looking at the NOIs, and even if I barely adjust the below the line numbers instead of the 4250, which is the vacant rate, increasing it to 45, which is the occupied rate, and it lowers to 93,445. So it's very close, and yeah, I'm okay with the original assessment the way it is.
I am too.
Okay. I think it's still slightly high. I don't think it's down to 80 million, but all right, we've got enough folks to do it. So
Mary, I just don't see how you could bring it down any, but I agree that what it
Right.
is, but that's the D's the closest you're going to get.
mhm. Okay. Somebody want to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move that we confirm the county's 2025 assessment at 93,542,200.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Penaranda, all in favor?
All right.
All right.
Gonna go. And then opposed? Okay, it's 4-1 without Mr. Hoffman. The county's assessment of 93,542,200 has been confirmed. And the last case on the agenda is RPC 24004-016 at 2110 Washington Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property. Turn your microphone on, sir.
Thank you. So this is a 161,000 square foot office building. It's fully occupied by Arlington County. It was built in 1990. Now we know from the county that the 2025 assessments reflect an average decrease in the office market of 11%. So that's the county telling us we believe the office market in Arlington County decreased 11% over the course of 2024. So despite the deteriorating market conditions for office properties, this property's assessment only decreased 2.4%. Now, as you can tell from the county's review, the initial items on review were uniform concessions, the vacancy rate, and the cap rate. Upon review, the county did change the vacancy rate from the incorrect 5% to the correct guideline rate of 8%. So, we've heard in the past cases that mass appraisal. So how does 5% as a vacancy rate make it into mass appraisal? Obviously it's not just a straight put in the property address and click enter. So there are human elements to this for that error to have occurred. Along with the county updating in their review the vacancy rate from 5% to the guideline rate of 8%, the county did adjust the rental rate from $38 a foot to $39 a foot. This effectively results in a net neutral change to the current assessment, increasing the vacancy rate but bumping the rental rate offset each other. Now, looking further into this, we see that on August 21st of last year, the county did testify to the board that leases in place averaged $39.68 per square foot. Now, in that case, the county had imputed rents at $35 per square foot on the assessment and $36 on the test count. Those rates are 11.8 and 9.3% lower than the rents in place. Looking at the 2025 assessment, we know that the county knew as of last August, rents in place were $39.68 a foot. The county now states, that with new information, they went from 39.68 to 39.89 a foot. The initial assessment used $38 a foot, again, increased to $39 a foot on the test. This is a difference of 4.2% and 2% less than the stated lease rate in place. So the question is, where are these differences from the lease rate coming from? We had last year 9.3% lower, 11.8% lower. This year, 4.2% lower, 2% lower. Why? Where does this scattershot approach of imputing rents come from? I mean, it's a little bit unpredictable from a taxpayer's perspective. So we did conduct a study of rental rates that the county used on assessments compared to the rents in place at those same offices. We've provided this study in the board book on page 72. This study shows that on average, the county applied a discount of 9.2% to leases in place. This is consistent with how the county has assessed this property in 2024, but obviously much different from how the county has assessed this property for 2025. Again, the question is why? Equalization purposes, 9.2%. We had a data set of, I believe it was 62 properties, average 9.2% reduction to leases in place. Why is this one not equalized with those? Our appeal pro forma, we've imputed an equalized discount to leases in place. We've imputed a discount of 10%. This is consistent with how the county's assessed this property over the past several years. Now, turning to the cap rate, we've previously discussed the data points the county relied on. We've heard that Corpax wasn't the only source, but if you look at the data, it does tend to paint a different picture. You look at the Corpax rate and what the county actually did, and they do flow. I'll share my screen again. This is the Corpax low end, this 8.578. That's the Keystone rate. You see they flow directly from that. Now, we did meet with the county. Mr. Peralta proposed, hey, let's meet. We'll tell you how we got our cap rates. No conclusion was reached in that meeting. We left the meeting with the offer to provide a written questions on how they got the cap rate. We provided those several weeks ago, have not received a response yet. But the data here, I don't think the county will admit it, but it's pretty clear that that Keystone rate, the Corpax low end rate, they do flow directly from that. Now, I could be wrong, but it looks pretty much like that's the primary source. Now, if you also look at the other sources that the counties cited that they relied on, page 20 of the board book, we provided all these in a summary so you can see it apples to apples on their summary page, this page that they've provided previously. These are unloaded rates. You have to make sure that you load them with the tax rate because what they presented here is a loaded rate. So that's automatically going to be about 1.2% greater than these other sources. So you have to make an apples to apples comparison. You have to either take out the tax rate from the county's rates or add in the tax rate to the other sources. We've done just that on page 20 of the board book. What you see from the conclusion, this summary includes Corpax, PwC, RERC, CoStar, CBRE, all of the sources that were put in writing as what the county relied on. You look at those, you see the county's rates are between 115 basis points lower and 134 basis points lower. You can see right here in black and white in the county's own write-up, they are below even just the single source of Corpax. They're between 23 basis points and 116 basis points below Corpax. Now you add in the rest of these studies, that changes to 115 basis points below and 134 basis points below, with an average of 120 basis points below those sources. Now, looking at the Corpax report a little more, again, it seems that the cap rates all flow from this sale of the Potomac Tower. That was an owner-occupier. What importance does an owner-occupier have on sales? We've provided a study looking at owner-occupiers when they purchase a property. How does it impact the sale price? That's provided on page 12 of the board. What this study shows is that when you have an owner-occupant buying the property that they occupy, they pay at least double what other market participants pay. Now, many reasons for this, primarily, they want to control the asset. We have the Potomac Tower. They want to expand. They want to make changes. They couldn't do that. They were flush with money, so they really wanted to control. Another factor with owner occupants is they're not professional commercial real estate operators. They're not sophisticated necessarily. That's what happened with this property. Now, we've also included in the board book the Appraisal Institute's procedures for derivation of cap rates beginning on page 36. You have to make adjustments to sale cap rates. You have to make adjustments for differences between the subject property and the sale comp. The Appraisal Institute states that comp cap rates should not be reflective of different market conditions. There's clearly different market conditions between the Potomac Tower and the subject property. None of those have been taken into account with the cap rate on this property. Thank you.
Ms. Kelly for the county, please.
Thank you. So this property is Sequoia Plaza 2. It's located at 2110 Washington Boulevard. I just want to really focus on page 3 of the packet. That's the summary sheet. This property was 100% occupied as of the date of value. And the average office lease for this property was $39.89. Now, if you look at the history, especially there was a sale for this property, so it was a partial year for 2021. But for 2022, 2023, and 2024, if you look at the NOI going across the board, and you look at the original assessment for the department, which is in column D, I'm just not calling out numbers, but if you look at the original assessment is still lower than that of 2023, that of 2022, and what was reported for 2024. The test was conducted mainly because of there was an error. We are manually evaluating these properties, and sometimes there's just user error. The vacancy rate for 2024 was 5%. This year was 8%. So when we look at the property, we do have to look at everything together. We conducted a test. We also increased the rent based on what was in the rent roll. As I noted, the rents were, the average rent, if you look at page 6 of the packet, is $39.89. Therefore, we use $39 in our test. So that's the reason for that increase from $38 to $39. We reflected the correct vacancy rate of 8% in the test. And we use the same dollar per square foot for OpEx in the test as well. And if you note that number for OpEx that we use in the original column D is still higher than everything that's been reported for the last few years. Now, I do note that there was I believe it was a 5% increase, 5.5% increase in office rent from what was reported in column C to column E, and these are their reportings. So there's a 5.5% increase from column C to column D just in on the first line for office rent. And then there is a slightly, I think it's like 7.4% increase in NOI from column C to column E. Our original assessment is lower than both of those. I would ask that the board confirm the original assessment as fair and equitable at $5,020,293. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the board?
No.
Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, I was just wondering, in between column D and F, I see that 5% was used in column D and 8% was used in column F. And you mentioned that. Can you clarify that a bit more about why that changed?
That was an error. The 5% rate was the vacancy rate for properties that were under 5% vacant for 2024. This year, there was a shift in the vacancy percentages, and now it's anything within 0 to 8%. They actually get an 8% vacancy rate. So that really should have been 8% that was used in that assessment and not 5%.
So in column D, it should be 8% and not 5%.
That's correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Ms. Kelly, have you taken a minute to wrap up?
I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up.
Yes, thank you. So this property is not treated equitably with similar properties with regards to concessions. We've provided the study on rental rates to assessment rates, in-place rental rates to the actual assessment rates. We provided that in the board book. We see from that study, the county has imputed 9.2% concessions on average. Here, the county's test column only uses a 2% concession rate. That's obviously not equitable with similar properties in the county. Now, looking at the cap rate, we can also look at 1201 Wilson. That property sold last year. It was 100% occupied at the time of sale. That property sold for a reported cap rate loaded of 9.278%. If we simply take that data point and apply the county's own effective age adjustment of 90 basis points to the subject property, we see the cap rate would be 10.178%. That's making an effective age adjustment to that sale comp at 1201 Wilson, a 2017 build premier building in the county. Gets us to 10.718. As it stands, the assessment values this property as being better than 1201 Wilson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, it's just among the board. Where's everybody on this phone? Mr. Mendez.
I have no problem with the current assessment. The only thing I did was change the vacancy rate from 5 to 8%. And that came out to 51,032,100.
I assume that's what you were doing based on your question. Anybody else? Mr. Penranda?
No, I was okay with the original assessment the way it was, looking at, the history and the NOIs and, pretty much all the numbers the way they are. I'm okay with the assessment the way it is.
Right, I agree. I mean, it's actually a reduction. I mean, it's a pretty stabilized building. I don't have a problem with the original assessment either. I mean, if everybody, was leaning towards what Mr. Mendez was saying, I guess I could go there, but I don't have a need to go there. Mr. Yates?
Yeah, I'm fine with the original assessment as it is. And the reason I would not do the 8% is because they're using the actual numbers from 24 on the income side. I mean, I think it's already adjusted in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Anything different, Mr. Huffman?
Nope.
All right, then I'm gonna move to confirm the county at the 53,407,000. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Yates is a second. All in favor?
All right.
Aye, opposed? Oh, okay, we have Mr. Mendez in opposition, but it is still 4-1. So the county's confirmed at 53,407,000 even. That completes the agenda for today. Does anybody have any other business? No? Okay, then we will stand adjourned here at 10:08, reconvene tomorrow, Wednesday, July 9th, in person for the board members at 9 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.